Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gift. In this video I'll be making this beautiful dress with 3 yards of crepe fabric. So I'll be drafting the pattern for the half length first. I already have my vertical lines on this paper. The first line is my shoulder line. From my shoulder to my bust point is 10 inches. That is the second line. Then from my shoulder to my under bust is 13 inches. From my shoulder to my waistline is 15 inches. On the shoulder line, I'm going to mark my shoulder measurement divided by 2, which is 8 inches. From that 8 inches, I'm going to come down by 1 inch as my shoulder slope. Then from the 1 inch, I'm going to mark my round armhole measurement divided by 2, which is going to give me 8 inches. I just marked it there. I'm going to connect the armhole measurements to the shoulder slope like this on a straight line, and this is going to serve as my armhole line. I'm going to extend the line towards this other part of the paper like this. So I'm going to get the midpoint of the armhole line. So I'm going to divide the line into 2 by folding my tape into 2 equal parts. It's going to give me 4 inches. I just marked it. Then I'm going to go in by half an inch from that 4 inches. Then on this armhole line, I'm going to mark my bust measurement divided by 4, which should give me 8.5. Then I'm going to add 2 inches seam allowance to the side. So I'm going to connect the bust measurement to the half an inch. Then I'm going to connect the top of the line to the shoulder slope. For the neckline, I'm going to be taking the width of 3 inches. Then I'm going to connect that width to my under bust line with my ruler like this. So I'm going to connect it down to the under bust line. Then I'm going to connect the neckline to the shoulder slope. So this dress has a back's waistline. So for the back's waistline allowance, I'm going to be coming down by 3 inches. You can come down by 3.5 or 4 inches, but don't exceed 4 inches. So I'm going to rule a straight line across the dot I just marked. So this is the back's allowance I added to it. On the under bust line, I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple measurements divided by 2. That will be my dot. I'm going to roll out that dot on a straight line. Then I'm going to go out by half an inch on both sides of the dot line. Then I'm going to roll both of the half an inch on straight lines also. So I've already marked my bust measurements divided by 2 plus 2 inches seam allowance. On this point here, I'm going to mark my under bust measurements divided by 4 plus 2 inches seam allowance. Then on the waistline, I'm going to mark my waist measurements divided by 4. Then I'm going to replace the dart allowance, which is 1 inch. Then I'm going to add 2 inches seam allowance to it. Don't forget to replace the darts. So I'm going to connect all the points together like this. So I'm going to mark the seam allowance I added to it, which is 2 inches. I'm going to highlight it. Then on this back's waistline, the center like this, I'm going to mark half an inch. So I'm going to connect that half an inch to the allowance, to the seam allowance like this. So this is how the shape of the basque waistline is going to be. If you want yours to look different from this, you can go ahead and shape it now. So I'm going to cut out the excess part of the paper. So when cutting yours, you should avoid cutting the down part first. So I'm going to explain that later and cut the remaining part of the paper. Then I'm going to label it my bust point and under bust. So I'm going to split the paper open. I'm going to split the paper into two from the under bust line. So I'm going to close up this dart like this. So this place like this, I'm supposed to extend it down. So because I didn't extend it, you can see it's now shorter when I split it open to cover the dart. So I'm going to trace this pattern on another paper so I'll be able to correct the error. So I've gone ahead to trace the pattern on this paper, so I'm going to drop the old ones. So before I cut the down part, I'm going to lap the dart like this as if I want to close it now. So when I lap it like this, you can see the lines are no longer equal. So I'm going to extend the longer one to this other part of the paper so it will be the same thing. So I extended it like this so it will blend. So if I open it up, you can see how it's looking. So I'm going to fold it back like this. Ensure you fold it back like this before cutting it. So I'm going to cut out the excess part of it. Then I'm going to split the paper through this side. So when I split it through this side and I place it on it, you can see the length is now the same thing. So the other one that I made mistake, the length is not the same thing. This other side is shorter than the side is shorter than the center. From the center of the paper, I marked 3 inches. This is the allowance I'll be adding to the front. You can make it 3.5 inches. So it's like the wrap allowance. So I'm going to place my paper on it like this. The tip of the paper is going to touch the 3 inches line like this. Then the length is the same thing. So make sure the length is from your shoulder to your under bust line. The length of the two papers should be the same thing. Then I will make sure the paper is stable on each other. So I'm going to mark the neckline like this towards the 3 inches allowance. So I already know where the neckline is. That is why I shifted my paper. So I'm going to mark it like this in a slanted way towards that 3 inches allowance. From the shoulder of the pattern we drafted earlier, I'm going to be taking my sleeves length. So my sleeves length is going to be 16 inches. So I'm going to mark 16 inches here. So you can measure yourself to know where you want your sleeves to stop. Then I'm going to connect the 16 inches to the tip of the neckline like this on a straight line. From the 16 inches at the side of the paper, I'm going to come down by 1 inch as my shoulder slope. Then I'm going to connect it back to the sleeves line like this. Then I'm going to extend that line from the 16 inches to the end of the paper like this. So I'm going to place the pattern on the side like this to trace the armhole. So I'm going to follow the shape of the armhole from the side like this. Then from this point, I'm going to use my free hand and connect it back to the shoulder slope like this. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, you can follow what I'm doing. So for the neckline, this neckline we connected can be used for the back. So for the front neckline, I'm going to take my ruler and connect the line like this and connect it to the end of that 3 inches allowance. I'm going to connect it to the tip of the paper like this. You can just follow what I'm doing if you don't understand what I'm saying. So this first one that we drew, the first line that we drew earlier, you can use that one for the back pattern, or you can go deep into the paper if you want your back to be more open. So I'm going to cut out the excess part of the paper. So we'll no longer be needing this first pattern. So this is the main pattern we'll be using. I'm going to use it to cut both the front and the back. For the down part of the pattern, I went ahead to join the darts together with this masking tape. So I'm just checking the length of the paper to see. So it's 13 inches. It's exactly my under bust measurements. So I'm just going to write front and back because I'll be using it to cut both the front and back fabric. While cutting the back paper fabric, can just take this in and take the back fabric, or you can go deeper to make the back more open. I used the pattern to cut the fabric. I added 1 inch to the top and half an inch to the length. I have 2 pieces of fabric. I'll be using both of them for the front. So I'm going to remove the pattern from it so you guys can see it. So I cut out the lining also following the same shape. I have 2 pieces of fabric, one for each side of the front piece. So this is the down parts of it. So I used the paper to cut it. I added half an inch to the top and half an inch to the length. So I used this paper to cut the back also. The difference between the front and the back is I added zipper allowance of 2 inches to the back, and the back is splitted into 2 because we'll be adding zipper to the back. So you can use your front pattern to cut the back. Just add zipper allowance to it. So I'm going to alter the pattern so I can use it to cut the back fabric. I told you guys earlier you can cut from this point, but I'm going to be taking mine deep into the paper like this. So from this part I went in by 2 or 1.5 inch. I don't know, I just randomly went into the paper. So I'm going to cut from that part out. So I'm going to cut from that part to the top like this. Then I'm going to use the paper to cut the back. So I have 2 pieces for the back. I added 1 inch to the top and half an inch to the length. So I have 2 pieces here, and I cut out 2 pieces for the lining. So this 1 inch I added to both the front and the back on the shoulder is because of the drawstrings. So this is the 2 fronts like this. So I'm going to turn it with the lining because I've placed the lining on it. I placed the 2 right sides on each other like this. So this is what is looking like. So I'm going to turn the face with the lining. I'm going to sew the center. I'm going to sew this side. I'm going to close the armhole. I'm just going to leave the down part open so I can be able to turn it over to the right side. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side of the front, even the back also. I placed the lining on it, and I'm going to turn it with the lining as well. I'm going to turn the top, the sides, the armhole. I'm just going to leave the down parts open so I can turn it over to the right side. So I went out to cut the linings for this down part also. So for the front part, it has one lining, then the back has two lining because it's already splitted into two, one for each of the piece. So I've gone ahead to turn the fabric with the lining, and this is what I have. So for the down part, after turning and ironing it, I ran a straight gather stitch at the down part. So I'm going to draw the one part of the rope, the gathered rope. So I'm going to draw the rope, or the thread rather. I'm going to drag it so it will gather. So use your machine and make a gather stitch. So when I drag the gather, I'm going to drag this other part also. I'm going to gather it. Then before I gather to the end, so I'm going to mark the 3 inches allowance we added to it because we are going to overlap it. Then I'm going to drag this part and gather it also. Then after gathering it, so the parts that you want to overlap the other part, you are going to place it on top the other fabric from that 3 inches. So if it's 3.5 inches, that is the allowance you added to it, you place it from the 3.5 inches. So I'm going to measure the waist of this, whatever I have, that will be what I'm going to gather this part to. So I'm going to gather it so that it will fit into that other fabric. So I'll ensure I stitch the two places that is going to overlap. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side, for the back. So after turning it with the lining piece, I ran a gather stitch at the down part. Then I'm going to drag the thread to gather it. I'm going to drag it so it will fit into this part. So for the back, I'm going to place it like this. So I notched my zipper allowance. The back is not going to enter into the zipper allowance, this part of the back. So I'm going to shift it from the zipper allowance. Then I'm going to pin it to the fabric from the side like this to where I want it to stop. So if you want to drag it to the middle a bit, you can drag it, or if you want it a bit from your zipper allowance, you can place it like that. So just make sure it fits into the part you want it to fit into, then sew it to the fabric. So I've gone ahead to sew the front to this part of the fabric. After sewing the front, I did the back also. You can see it's just my zipper allowance that is remaining at the back. So I did the same thing for the other back as well. Then I went ahead to join the two shoulders together. So after joining the two shoulders together, I'm going to lay it flat and sew both edges on each side of the fabric, so I can make channels there so that ropes can pass through for the drawstrings. So this is the other side of the shoulder. I've gone ahead to make the two channels. You can see how it's looking like, but this other place is still left, is still there. So these are the two ropes I'll be passing through the channel. You can make it as long as you want to. Just go ahead and make a rope. So for both sleeves, we'll be needing 4 ropes, 2 for each side of the sleeves. So I'm going to use the safety pin to pass the rope to the end of the fabric. So I didn't allow the rope to come out totally from the other side of the fabric because that is the neckline. So I pin it down and I'm going to stitch it. I'm going to stitch the rope well so it will not come off. So I'm going to make the channel on these other sleeves and I'm going to pass the rope through it. So I'm going to use my lining to turn these rough parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my lining on it like this. So the right part of the lining is the one facing down, then the wrong part is up. I'm going to sew it on this part like this. So I'm going to place it on the rough edges like this, on the other side of the rough edges, then I'm going to sew it. When I turn it over, it's going to hide the rough edges inside. So I'm going to do the same thing for the back. So the right side of the back is on the fabric, then the wrong side is the side facing me. So I'm going to place it like this, then I'm going to join these parts together like this. After joining these parts together, I'm going to join the zipper allowance side also for the back. For the front is just that part, for the back I'm going to join the zipper allowance. So I'm done turning it with my lining, and this is what it's looking like. After turning it with the lining, I went ahead to close up both sides with my body measurement. So the measurement I used is my waist measurement. The side is free, the bust area is free. I used my waist measurement divided by 2 for the waist. So I closed the zipper allowance before taking my body measurements. Now I'm going to open the zipper allowance up like this. So after opening the zipper allowance up, I'm going to take my tape and measure the down parts of this fabric round like this, so that we'll know how I'm going to cut the fabric I'll be using for the gather. So I'm going to take my tape, I'm going to measure it round. So what I have is 32 inches. So the fabric I have for my gather is 4 yards of fabric. That is 36 inches times 4. That is the quantity of fabric I'm using, or the width of fabric I'm using rather. So how I got the length of this fabric, my half length plus the back's waistline allowance is 19 inches. So I want the length of this dress to be 35 inches plus 2 inches seam allowance. So when I minus the 19 inches from it, whatever I have is the length of this fabric. So I've already gathered this fabric. I told you guys it's 4 yards. So I'm going to sew it around this part like this. So if you don't have enough fabric, whatever you have there, you go ahead and multiply it by 3 inches. Or if you have fabric in excess, you can make it as big as you want to. So I went ahead to, after adding the gathers, I went ahead to close the back. I added my zipper to the back, and this is the finished